the late start, but allow me to welcome you to our Parents Month webinar. My name is Elizabeth Crossman. I'm the current president of the Jamaica Psychiatric Association, and I'm also the regional psychiatrist for the Southeast Regional Health Authority. This evening, Parents Month webinar, the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work from the University of the West Indies, Mona, Western Jamaica campus, is partnering with the Western Regional Health Authority, Mental Health Services, the Southeast Regional Health Authority, Mental Health Services, and the Jamaica Psychiatric Association. And we are looking at parenting because we realize that much is required. And we'll be going from November 26th to 29 right here at 6 p.m. And we'll be going through a range of topics that you will not want to miss at all. And you may be wondering, why is it that we are talking so much about parenting? In Jamaica, we have about 800,000 children. And World Health Organization has stated that 10 to 20% of children will be diagnosed with a mental disorder or mental illness. And what is very frightening is that 50% of these children will be diagnosed before 14 years old. And so we recognize the challenge that we would have in managing and in taking care of our children. And you know, we always say prevention is better than cure. And we do believe that prevention is better than cure. And what it is that we want to do, we recognize that we have to raise the awareness to what it is that all of us can do as community in helping our children and our adolescents. Parenting is one such way. Stigma and discrimination is really affecting how we manage and the access to care. But if we are able to understand a little bit more, if we are able to learn more about what parenting really entails, what it is that we need to be doing, because to tell the truth, there's no handbook, but we are learning from experience and we are learning from what the best practices have been showing. And we know that together that we can do it. And here are some quotes that I want us to look at, to listen to. Parenting is the easiest thing in the world to have an opinion about, but the hardest thing in the world to do. And listen to this one. That's from Matt Walsh. Frank A. Clark said the most important thing that parents can teach their children is how to get along without them. And Peter Cross has come in the mix and he said that parenting is not a perfect journey, but a perfect opportunity to love and guide your children. We are going to now ask God's blessing as we go into our week or 3 days, 4 days of our webinars, and because we believe that the Almighty can guide, and so we look and we seek for his guidance. Let us pray. And so, God, we thank you because you have blessed us. You have blessed us in so many ways, in so many opportunities that you have given to us. And despite the challenges, we learn from the challenges and make those challenges into new beginnings and new opportunities. We thank you that we have this opportunity to speak and the opportunity to bring persons together so that we can talk, we can discuss, we can share best practices, we can help others to learn, and we can give others even more to be able to manage and to have strategies to address the challenges that they may face or we may face with our children and adolescents or as parents. So we thank you for your guidance, and we ask that as we give and as we speak, that it will not be just left where we are sitting, but together we can collaborate, we can unite, so that we will make our children and adolescents better persons for tomorrow. Guide, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we are here today and we are going to be talking about parenting. And our theme, Parenting Much is Required, Strategies for Change, is what we'll be focusing on today, day one. And we have who a very well rounded person who's going to be coming to us this afternoon to speak on the matter of parenting strategies for change. Allow me to introduce Miss Georgia Rose. Miss Georgia Rose is a clinical psychologist and has been very involved in mental health education and early childhood development. She holds a master's degree in clinical psychology, pardon me, and a master's of arts degree in infant and early childhood development. And currently, she's completing a doctor of philosophy in infant and early childhood development. She's actively engaged as a clinician within the Western region and has been in this region for over 20 years and has contributed vastly to the development of the child and adolescent mental health services within that region. She's also very involved in the University of the West Indies Western Jamaica campus and has contributed a lot to development to education in the form of print media articles, an accomplished public speaker, and you will see and you will be able to tell and give your feedback after her presentation. In 2015, she was recognized by the Special Education Unit of the Ministry of Education and Youth for unrelenting and untiring service to special education. She's also actively engaged in community service, and as she was a past board member of the Peace Management Initiative of St. James, she's also a consultant to the Ethics Review Board for kidney transplants in Western Jamaica, and also on the Ethics Review Board of the Bariatric Surgery Team. She has also contributed significantly to to St. James Red Cross, being the past chairman, and has had numerous psychological support trainings across the Caribbean on behalf of the International Federation of the Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Unit particularly. She's passionate and she promotes mental health and wellness in all spheres. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to hand over to Miss Georgia Rose, who will guide the discussions for the evening. Miss Rose.
Thank you ever so much, Dr. Crossman, for that lovely introduction. I am so floored. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be here with you this evening. We want to thank you for your patience, given our slight delay. I have a little PowerPoint presentation prepared, but I don't really need it. It is really here just to act as a guide for us so that we're all clear on what it is that we're sharing. Parenting, much is required. Where do we begin when we think about the role and the activity of parenting? And I want us to think of parenting as an active verb, an activity that we're constantly engaging in. And Dr. Crossman highlighted, a point that we hear quite often, and people might believe that it is overused, but it is so relevant. The reality is that there is no handbook. There is no curriculum that really guides and outlines how we move through the space of parenting. And while that in some ways is such a benefit and a privilege, it can also make the tasks so much more difficult, because how do you become a parent? And we're stepping away from the physical activity that is engaged in to bring forth children. And we step away from the activities, the legalistic procedures of becoming parents when it does not occur in a biological manner. How do we really step into this role and engage in this capacity in a meaningful way as it was intended? ask ourselves what makes a great parent. So often we say that people or individuals have done an exceptional job of raising their children. What are the matrices or the variables that were taken into consideration when we denote such lavish praises on other individuals who are participating in this dance called parenting? And as a parent, where do we find support? How do we improve and grow and mature into this role? Because there is no guide. And I like to say to parents that the beauty of not having a guide is that we all start from scratch. Each of us, no matter how skilled and knowledgeable we might feel in the role, I dare say that every time we step into the space of parenting, we are a new parent in that moment. And someone might say, what do you mean by that? Every child is different. So every time we start to parent, we're doing a different job. We would love to say this worked with all of my children, but the reality is that that is rarely ever true. Every child pulls out different parts of our personality and requires different things from us and meet us at different stages and phases in our own lives. I want to share a story with you, and I am a big believer in the power of stories for so many reasons. And there is this book. A lot of you might be familiar with the book, and if you've never heard about it, it's titled The Bible. And a lot of people have met this book, and it has lots of chapters. And this is by no means a religious or spiritual presentation, but this very notorious book has a lot of stories in it, and I love to pull on some of these stories. And this is a story that has been sitting on my heart for quite some time as I have been navigating the space of parenting and speaking to parents. And some of you might be familiar with this story because it is such a more popular one. In this book called the Bible, there's a chapter known as Matthew. And in Matthew, you get to a particular space. It is called Matthew chapter 25. And there is this very powerful story about a master and his three servants. And this story is titled The Parable of the Talents. In summary, we are told that this master is going away on this long journey. And he calls his trusted servants to him. To one, he bestows upon him 5 talents. To the other, he gives 2. And to the final, he gives 1. And we are told that the master gives each servant the talents based on their capacities. The master goes away, and while he is away, the servant who received 5 doubled his to 10, the one who received 2 doubles his to 4. But the one who had been given 1, he was very fearful, very cautious, very apprehensive, very doubtful, and he buried his to keep it safe. We're told that the master returned from his journey and was met upon by his 3 servants. Of course, the servants who had doubled theirs, the ones who had been entrusted with 5 and 2, were very excited, very proud, very jubilant. And they said, Master, Master, we want to let you know that we have doubled what was entrusted into our care. And the master was very pleased. And he heaped praises upon these 2. Turning to the one who had been given 1, he asked, what have you done? And he told him, I was scared, I was fearful, I was worried, so I buried mine. And the story tells us that the master is very upset. He takes the single talent and he hands it over to the one who had gotten the most, the one who had doubled his to 10. I love this story because I think it is very befitting for our roles as stewards of our children. If we see our children as gifts that have been given to us to make much of, we come into a realization of the seriousness of the role that has been entrusted into our care. Have we engaged in activities and actions that have set the pace and the tone to double the capacities of our children, to make much of them and to bring them within the fullness of themselves? Or have we acted in ways that were so cautious and so doubtful and so fearful that we limited our children within their own scope of growth and reduced the meaning of their lives? Parenting is such a powerful role. I don't think we ascribe it the value that it truly deserves. And we recognize that the roles and functions of the members of the society has shifted. And I dare say we are reaping much of the, I don't know if we want to call those rewards, but the consequences of having reduced the value of parenting to nothing but minuscule importance. Because parents are growing, guarding, guiding, promoting, pushing the next generation for each of us. And if we don't see the value in that, then we are even more lost. What it is that we have done with the children that have been entrusted into our care. The journey into parenting can bring with it so many emotions. It can feel like Secret Santa, the gift that you are expecting, but you don't know what the contents will entail. Will it be marvelous? Will we have the best children, the brightest, the smartest, the most talented? Will they be physically, athletically gifted? Will they be creative masters and geniuses? Or will they cause us to clutch our pearls and our hearts? Will they give us angst and worry and distress? So it is a gift that some of us might willingly embrace, and a gift that some of us might be terrified to open. What I want us to be reminded of as we unwrap the gifts of our children, as we come into the fullness of our role as parents, is that there are no foolproof approaches. There is no strategy that most definitely will work. Parenting is one of the most humbling experiences of your life. I like to say, as a parent, when you say, never would my child, there comes your child, nevering like they have nevered before. And what I mean by that is that so many behaviors and mannerisms and characteristics that we have no idea where they came from will shoot their heads up and rise up in our children. So, while we may not have the confidence about what will be in the package of our children, what we want to do is to boldly step into the role and to have that faith and confidence, like the servant in the parable of the talents who invested his 5 with no surety that they would be doubled, but had a little bit of faith. And he did that with intentionality. He intended to please his master. What is your intention as a parent? And that is a question I want you to think about as you move forward. When I embarked on my journey of even higher education in my PhD studies, this was something that kept popping up within my research, my sojourn, that so often the burden of the society weighs on the shoulders of the parents. But how much support have we been given to do this job? How do we know whether we should take the left or the right, the blue or the red pill? How do we get assurance in the decisions that we make? How do we multiply the gift of our children so that at some point in time, our master, the world, the environment, the society will say, well done, you have done an amazing job. And I want you to think on these 5 points as we go through that conversation. 1, how does your own lived experience of parenting influence you as a parent in this moment? Because what we must come to appreciate is that while there is no blueprint or manual that guides us in this activity of parenting, we already have a blueprint ingrained in us. It comes from the experiences that we had as children. So this is not your first time in parenting. The difference is the roles have been reversed. What we don't recognize is that our brain, or souls, or spirits, whatever you want to call it, stores the memories of these experiences. And in our own way, we try to make them our own. So, quite an interesting thing. How were you loved as a child? Were you loved as a child? Did you perceive the actions and emotions of your family and household as one of love? How were you disciplined as a child? Was discipline a part of your household? Was discipline used to punish, to maim, to corrugate? Or was discipline used to grow, to build, and repair? Were you ever celebrated as a child? And if so, how were you celebrated? What was your value as a child in your household? What was your experience of having been fathered? Were you fathered? What was your experience of having been mothered? Were you mothered? Because the blueprint that we have, that we use on our children, is heavily influenced by our experience of having been past parented. For some of us, we erase the past of our own experiences and seek to create an entirely new blueprint that it isn't necessarily better than the one that we were trying to escape in our own children. For some of us, we follow the blueprint to a T. We do not deviate from what was our reality of having been parented. And then for some of us, we've been slowly modifying it to build the dream blueprint. Ask yourself, what kind of parent would you like to be? When you describe and define and categorize yourself as a parent, what does that look like? What is it about? Do you want to be the supportive parent, the strict parent, the firm parent, the disciplinarian, the authoritative parent? Do you want to be the parent that is a friend? How do you see yourself as a parent? How do you wish for your children who are now having this lived experience with you to experience you? There is a trend on social media where parents have been charged with giving their children a sheet of paper, and if you are so bold to ask their children, how do you see your parent? What kind of parent do you have? What would you like for your parent to do differently? And so many of the responses of the children have been very sombering, because the parent that individuals thought they were was not the parent that their children was receiving. And in what ways do you believe as a parent you need to grow? We work in child and adolescent mental health spaces, and so often children are engaged in our services with the request for them to change. Very often our parents fail to recognize that they will also need to change. The growth cannot be one directional, and all of us are so amazing in so many ways as parents, but all of us in so many ways require some amount of growth, and I want us to reflect on that. Parenting is not a pastime. It's not a hobby. It's not a co-curricular activity. It is the single most important role we, as guardians of the future, hold. We have the capacity to build great men and women who boldly step into life, who feel confident, who want to conquer and change the world in positive ways. Or we can be like the servant who is trepid and afraid, and therefore provide zero guidance or limited guidance or weak guidance. The parents who do not hold firm on any position, the parents that have left children to parent themselves. If children did not require adult support, supervision, and guidance, they would not have been given to us. And that requires no religious or spiritual beliefs or philosophy. I think from any standpoint, we can fully appreciate that from an evolutionary survival perspective, children require the scaffold that parents bring to the table. Therefore, As intentional parents, our aim is not to be perfect, because we will never be. Just as how we will never have perfect children, our aim is to be present. Our aim is to be intentional in what it is that we seek and choose to have evolve and unfold in our children. As I prepared for this presentation, I came upon another presentation that was being done by a parenting group, and they spoke about the arguments that as parents we must be willing to have. They spoke about the arguments for rest, the arguments for boredom, the arguments for reading, the arguments for no. And basically the argument was reminding us that as parents we have a job, we have a role, we have a function. It is not enough to just give birth or to bring forth children into our physical space. It is more than the presence. It is more than the scolding. It is a recognition and an awareness that we have a responsibility to cultivate functional and healthy human beings. Dr. Crossman, in her introduction, spoke or quoted someone who said, "The best thing we can do for our children is teach them to survive without us. They can only survive without us if we have equipped them to be functional as adults." But in order to be functional as adults, we have to stand in this early space and role as parents in an intentional manner. We have to recognize that we have a responsibility to safeguard health and well-being. That none of this will happen by chance. And yes, we know sometimes wonderful individuals are forged out of fire. Individuals who may not have been parented by the parents that were given to them. But the literature and the research lets us know that those individuals would have been parented by others. Because parenting does not require biological connections. We get first dibs on our children. We get the opportunity to guide, to mold, to shepherd, and to grow our children in the way we see best fit. But if we fail in these roles because we are distracted by the other demands of life that we have prioritized, best believe someone else or something else will step in and parent our children on our behalf. Therefore, I stand back in my earlier position as the servant who multiplied their 5 and their 2, because they poured into the gifts that were given to them to make them more. How much have you poured into your own children? How much have you intentionally poured into their development as future adults and leaders and contributors of this great big space that we all occupy? It is not about perfection. It is about present. Robert Fulghum says, "Do not be worried that your children are always watching you, are never listening to you. Do not be worried that your children never listen to you. Worry that your children are always watching you." What this speaks to is very powerful. That it is more than the words that we say, but it is our entire being. Our children see the true us. We can present a facade to the world exterior to us, but we can't present that facade to our children. I was listening to a minister, and he was speaking about parenting, and he said, and I love to get my source from everywhere. I am so encouraged and affected by all the information that I meet and see, because you can always find value. And he said, people often ask him, how does he get his children to go to church? And he said, he doesn't ask them, he forces them, and people laughed. And he said, because I have to live the church that I want my children to go to. I can't be one thing in the church and another thing at home and then think my children are going to want to go to church. He says, I am the church and my children are the church. So they will forever be in the church. And I thought that was very powerful. He was speaking from a spiritual place. He was speaking about church. But his sentiment, his philosophy, and his perspective can be extended well beyond the spiritual place. What he is saying is, we have a responsibility to be what we wish for our children to become. If we want honest children, then we have to be honest people. If we want considerate children, then we have to be considerate parents. If we are unkind to our children, then we raise individuals who become unkind to the greater space and world. If we want respectful children, then we have to be respectful to them and to those that they see us interacting with. It is not about our children listening to us. It is more about our children seeing us. If we want our children to have the right values, if we want them to have good work ethic, then we have to demonstrate the very same thing. You know, I always say to people, individuals say to me sometimes, Georgia, you work a lot. That's true. But one of the things as I reflected on myself was I grew up in a household where my mother worked a lot. I don't know if that's a great thing, but that was my lived experience. And that came to me in a very natural way. I have tried to make it a lot more meaningful and healthier than what I saw my mother doing. But I never saw my mother sitting down. It was always a truth for me, my truth, that I had to earn my keep. And it is my hope that in seeing myself and my husband work, that my children will also know that they will have to earn their keep. It is our desire that they will do it better than we do. We are the lived experiences of our children. To whom much is given, much is required. We do not get to get away with doing little. We do not get to get away with doing the bare minimum. It is required that we are going to invest and turn a profit in the children that has been given to us. We do not get to enter into this space of parenting with mediocrity and dismalness, if there is such a word. We have to complete the task at hand in such an intentional way that our children have no choice but to excel, but to become the best versions of themselves, but to be great men and women. I shared with a team recently as I talked about the act of intentional parenting, because once again, I can only speak of my own lived experiences. As a young girl, my mother was a cashier, and her salary stub demonstrated that she earned a little over 200 Jamaican dollars a month. And of course, this is a long time ago, so we know it's not now. But my mother sent me to a prep school that cost $2,000 a term. I don't know how $200 a month, which would have equated to $600 a term, was able to send me to a prep school for $2,000. But it was an intent on her part that she required a certain degree of education. And in her opinion at that time, the requirement was for me to attend that school. And we know that there are many schools that I could have attended and still accomplished the goals that I have accomplished in life. But the intentionality of my mother at that time was that was her sacrifice. And it must have been a sacrifice for her. To whom much is given, much is required. We must be the gift in this world that our children need. We have to be the first line of support, this first line of defense, the first line of celebration for our children. Our children must feel that they are truly a gift and that they have value and they have much to offer to the world. They must feel that we have poured so much into them that they have no other alternative than to multiply. We must recognize that we are the bearers of life for our children. And we do not blame parents who struggle in the journey of parenting. because we recognize that it is not an easy path, but we remind, we encourage, and we demand that you receive, perceive, and believe your children to be blessings. To whom much is given, much is required. A call to arms. There is no good health. We always want to remind that without good mental health. I thank you so much for listening. Dr. Crossman?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Rose. Thank you so much, Ms. Georgia Rose, clinical psychologist in the Western Regional Health Authority. And she has really given us much food for thought, um, speaking about strategies for change, for parenting, much is required. And she spoke about the intentionality of what we need to be doing to be able to manage and to use the strategies that we are given from our lived experiences. Can you imagine what it is that we have gone through during our childhood experiences? How can that impact on our parenting, and how we can take positive lessons from those experiences, and looking at what type of parent you want to be and how it is that you wish your children to see you as a parent and how you see yourself as a parent, and what the experiences that you want your children to have. I know that there's a lot of thinking going on now because there are so many things that she touched on. You know, the parable, to whom much is given, much is required. And I'm looking to see if we have any comments or any questions for you in the chat, Miss Rose. One of the things I'd love to ask you, though, Miss Rose, we're talking about parenting, much is required. And we know that life experiences are there, and the persons are saying, I have given so much, I've done so much, and yet this child is not the child that the expectations are not there. How do we help parents to rise above the blame game in those instances?
Dr. Crossman, that is such a wonderful question. And I thank you for posing it. One, we want to remind parents that they're not alone, and to encourage parents to seek help. Seek help from the qualified professionals, those individuals that have experience in working with families. Because, you know, sometimes as parents we're struggling and we have so much voices in our ears that can discourage us and make us feel even worse. So that is one, seek the help. But the second thing I want to remind parents is that we do not parent in a vacuum. And that is where the intentionality comes in even more, because we have to recognize the power and the potential of external influences. Who do we permit to be in the spaces with our children? And how aware are we of the individuals who are impacting and affecting our children? Having worked in child guidance for an extended time, you would be amazed how many children have been led down the path of destruction by others outside of the home. Sometimes these individuals are even friends of the family. So I want to remind parents that it is not that it is a fail-safe method, but the more involved and aware and present we are as parents, the more opportunities we have to interrupt the negative influences. Because sometimes, you know, we step back and we trust a little too much others, and we fail to see the dangers that are lurking around the corners or in the shadows. The more we speak to our children and create spaces where our children are comfortable speaking to us, is the more we are aware of what's running through their thoughts. Who is speaking to them? What is the influence they're exposed to? How many of us periodically, you know, check the histories of the website activities and phone activities? Simple things like that. You know, I remember as a child that as hard as my mother worked, every Tuesday evening your bag would get checked. It was such a troubling time for me as a child because you weren't sure what you were going to get in trouble for. I don't want to do that with my own children, but periodically I do go through school books. I take things apart in school bags and spend the time just reorganizing and guiding and asking questions that I would not have known had I not went on that path. So it's about being actively engaged at all times so that we can minimize the external threats that we can't always control.
Thank you for that response. I've seen some comments online. Um, Andrea McPherson, Chris and Christopher, excellent presentation. Princess Amandi, very short and spicy. Really enjoyed every minute of her short speech. So some very good comments here online. One of the things I'd like to ask you though, Ms. Rose, as we speak about parenting, and we speak about prevention, because if we are going to reduce the numbers of our children
Yes.
who end up having challenges, the ACEs as we love to call them, or
Yes.
the mental challenges that may happen, I'm just wondering how intentional
Mm-hmm.
we have been in providing areas, and it doesn't have to be part of health,
Mm-hmm.
probably in communities,
Yes.
in our churches, in our antenatal clinics,
Yes.
in providing that guidance to parents, and perhaps to start prenatal to
Mm-hmm.
looking at probably guidance for teenagers and young adults who will have that inclination to want to raise a family, and within our acute in our antenatal clinics for mothers who are there, in providing parenting workshops. I'm going to use that loosely.
Yes.
um, that captive audience, how intentional we may need to be. Your thoughts on that in
I think
guiding
there
and
is
in
so
providing those
much room.
avenues.
Yes, I agree with you, Dr. Crossman, because I think there are so many opportunities for us to engage parents, to provide parents with the knowledge and the information and the tools. I remember many years ago when I just moved to Montego Bay, the community college had an outreach program for a community. And as a part of the outreach, the
Okay.
principal then had said, can we do something on the psychological scale? So they did, basic computing, basic math, basic English. And she said, George, is there anything you could do? And I said, sure, I'd like to do something on parenting. And it was over, I think it was 6 weeks. And I did a little thing where I spoke to parents about, normal physical development, psychological development, just bringing that information to parents, talking about, strategies for
Mm.
discipline that many parents would not have been exposed to, communication with our children. And can I tell you, it was so well received, Dr. Crossman. There were so many parents that were able to reflect on where they needed to change as parents and their ability to say that this is how I was parented and I thought that this was what I was supposed to do, and their willingness to change and make it different. So I do think we have to get to a place where we have to support our parents a little bit more in our society, whether it is through our churches or
Mhm.
PTA meetings, the first meeting that's held the first day of school when parents are jubilant and excited and expectant, stepping into those spaces and providing those meaningful, targeted interventions because it makes a difference. And I do believe that knowledge is power. So often we do things until we
Yes.
learn that there's a different way to do it, that we will try it. And some people might say, as I said, when you spoke about, the handbook, people might say, we say that all the time. It has now become such a cliche. It's not a cliche, it's a fact. It's a fact. All of us are out there trying and we hope that it will work. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But we do know that you definitely see the rewards, when you pour into your children. But we want to say to parents, these are the ways you can pour into your children. It doesn't require money, you know. Pouring in might just be presence. I remember years ago um, going to a school in Upper Trelawney, and there was a little girl who lived with her grandmother, very happy child, and I asked her, what were some of the things that made living with her grandmother so amazing? And she told me that her grandmother did every single chore with her. She and her grandmother would make the bed together in the morning. She and her grandmother would sweep the house together. They would wash the dishes together. And I was so impressed because I don't think I'd ever heard of a grandmother like that before. So here was this family, they didn't have a lot, but this child was growing up in a space where she felt so loved and so supported, and her grandmother was the most important person to her. So those small things and steps and strategies make a difference. So if we're able to engage our parents and our parents to be, as you said, our antenatal clinics, our parents to be on what are some of the little things that we can do. I think you plant a seed and it will bear fruit, and we will definitely see the rewards in
Yeah,
the society.
yeah, yeah. We have um, kudos again from Miss Franklin Angelina. Great key points and takeaway. And there's a question from Miss Carla Edwards. How did you balance parenting your child or children and keeping your sanity, seeing all things happening in the society? That's first part of the question. The second part, what are some quick tips that we, I guess, can use to strengthen our mind and not lose it? So it's talking about the
The self care of the
psychological again.
parent, yes.
Right, right.
Right.
Balancing parenting and keeping your sanity and some quick tips to strengthen your
I
mind. So I
love
guess
that
your
question.
lived
Yes.
experience,
Yes, I
your
love that
lived
question.
experience.
And it's a beautiful question,
Yes,
Carla, because what it is
it is.
highlighting is the value of taking care of ourselves. Because we
Yes,
are better parents when we are doing well as an individual. I want to remind us that parenting is not a singular activity, it is a community activity. So you must seek the support and use the support. And we want to find the right support. I always say to parents, find other parents who share the same philosophy of parenting as you. So
yes.
I know Dr. Crossman in a very individual and personal capacity. I have no qualms about my children being in her space. So should I need that support and she were to be available, I would be comfortable with her keeping my children for a period of time. You need people like that in your space. That allows you to step away for a moment. And I'll give another practical example. Recently, I had gone out of town for work and come back very late, and I was very exhausted. And another parent that I knew just reached out of the blue. I think this was divine intervention, and asked me if I wanted her to give my children a lift to school because she was in the area. I was very comfortable. It meant that I was able to just get them out the door without having to get myself. I could give myself an extra hour to catch my breath. Those little things make the difference. I also speak about the value of sending our children to bed. I send my children to bed at a set time because it allows my mind to decompress. Because while they're awake or they're up, you also have to be present with them. So sending them to bed turns them off and turns me off as a parent for at least an hour before I also have to retire for bed. And that is a very luxurious statement because you and I know it's not an hour. We have so many things doing before we ourselves as the parents retire. Learning to do things without our children too. Stepping away every now and then, you have a good support system, Carla, whether it is your co-workers, because we can get support from many places, our relatives, other extended friends, your partner, and going for a walk, going for an ice cream. I was speaking to a work group in Mental Health Week, and I said, a parent said, sometimes you have to buy the ice cream and sit in the car and just enjoy it, because if you go inside, the children beg all of it and you don't get any. And, we were laughing. And his colleagues were saying he's selfish, but I agreed with him. Sometimes we need
Oh,
little moments for ourselves. So
that's
see
right.
it as not as not as you being reckless or you being neglectful as a parent. See it as a responsibility to take care of yourself. You don't need to have them attached to you all the time. Have individuals that you trust to keep them so that you can miss them a little bit and come back and be happy to be in the space with them, Carla. Yes.
Mm. I'm thinking Miss Rose, it speaks also to our support system, our community
Yes.
network, that
Yes.
our family structure,
Yes.
we have lost because
Yes.
of the things that we have been doing with our families and with communities, and we no longer have the structure anymore. And
Yes.
perhaps we need to get back to
To a
where we have
community based
those
system
support
of parenting.
systems.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes,
Definitely.
the grandmothers and the aunties and the cousins.
Yes.
Um, yes. Okay. Right. So a lot of kudos, Miss Rose, a lot of kudos going up for an excellent presentation. You spoke about the parable of the talent.
Yes.
Um, Very interesting way of interpreting. And I'm just wondering if persons the planned parenthood, because a lot of times we don't plan. Is
Hmm.
it that we should go in not planning, or should we be planning for parenthood?
To
Your
plan is
thoughts?
always better. To planning is always better, but I think according to the Statistical Institute, over 80% of children born in Jamaica are not planned for. So the reality is that our
Right.
society is not a planned parenting society. But I dare say that maybe we're moving more towards planning because we also hear that our families are having less children. So individuals are more
Yes, we are.
intentional about becoming parents, and I can understand that. It is always better to plan. And I think, Dr. Crossman, you spoke about
Mm-hmm.
how soon do we start to have these conversations. I think we should have these conversations from we reach our children are in grade 9 and 10. I think we should be speaking to
Mm-hmm.
our
Mm-hmm.
teenagers about
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
parenting means so that they understand why they shouldn't step into that role too early. And so that we have planted a seed that when they get to a place and they're ready to step into that role, that they're a little bit more equipped with the knowledge. Because when you plan for your children, it puts you in a better place to mitigate against the demands versus when they are not planned and you find yourself struggling to catch your breath. And oftentimes, when we see the abuse, the physical abuse, the
Mm-hmm.
emotional abuse, and even the sexual abuse, it is
Mm-hmm.
a consequence of children who there is no space for them or space has not been made for them in individuals' lives. So we encourage our families as best as you possibly can to plan for them. And if they
Mm-hmm.
come in an
Yeah.
unexpected way, to still plan for them because the
Mm-hmm.
planning can occur at many stages. So plan before we become expectant with them. And when we find out we're expectant, if we didn't plan for that, to start planning for them. We get a few months. We get 7 to 9 months, and you'd be amazed at how much we can accomplish within that time. So yes, Dr. Crossman.
Just something that came to my mind, Miss Rose, because you talk about intentionality or planning and the strategies that we are using to parent. Helicopter parents, how do you see this type of parenting, and probably a word to some of our parents who um, do not give our children
The
room
space.
for making mistakes, and also, taking initiative.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the helicopter parent, if we go back to the parable of the talents, is like the servant who buried his talent because he buried it out of fear.
Ah.
And helicopter
Mm-hmm.
parenting and parents who are overly hovering over children tend to do that not because they do not love their children, but because they're coming from a place of fear and worry. We have to respect and understand. It goes back to the point that you opened the segment with. The best thing we can do for our children is to teach them to survive without us. When you hover
Yes.
over your children, you prevent them from growing into their own confidence. And I have found, Dr. Crossman, in our clinical spaces, anecdotal evidence, because this is not something that we necessarily look at in terms of the statistical variables, but anecdotally, children who have parents who hover are more likely to rebel. Because if you feel trapped, you spend a lot of energy trying to get free. And those children, even though they rebel, oftentimes go through life lacking confidence in their own thoughts and decisions and reasoning capacity. It is not that we're going to allow our children to go and drown, but I do believe we need to give our children opportunities to try. We have to give them the trust, and you mete out the trust based on the age. And I want to give a practical example. My children have a bedtime of 8 o'clock. And I remember when my son hit 9, he said to me, my older son, he said, I would like to go to my bed a little later than my younger brother because I think I'm older and I should have that privilege. And my first inkling was to say to him no, because I sent to bed not as punishment, but because I believe that sleep is important. And I caught myself and I said to him, "What time would you like to go to bed?" He said, "I was thinking I could go to bed at 9 since I am 9." And I said, "Okay, let's try it out." He could not rise the next morning. And he was so exhausted. He said, "Mommy, I don't think
Yeah.
that was such a good idea. Maybe we should try for 8:30." So the bedtime is now 8:30. He did a lot better with the 8:30. But the beauty of that experience for me as a parent was giving him the
Ah,
opportunity to exercise that voice and to ask for that privilege, and then his ability to realize that it wasn't wise. You know, we have to give our children opportunities to make decisions, because, Dr. Crossman, we will not always be there with them to make the decisions for them, no matter how much we think we're going to be there. Recently, a parent dear to our community passed away from an illness, and one of the things that struck me the most with the passing of this parent was how much this parent loved their child. And I couldn't help thinking, who is going to love this child as much as this parent did? No one. And I used it as a reminder to our community members to say, we must remember to raise our children in such a way that when we are not around, they will be fine. And the only way we are able to do that is if we empower them. And if we hover and we are helicopters and we don't give them an opportunity to be free, then when we are no longer around, they're going to falter and are at a greater likelihood of failure. And that is the reality.
thank you so much, Miss Rose. It has been quite a good discussion, quite a good talk, punctuated with so much practical experience, so many practical experiences that I believe that we can take away from this presentation, some of the strategies that we can use to be able to survive in the parenting field. And for some of us, it may be a struggle, but we have been given some tips. We have been given the voice to speak about how intentional, what it is that we want to be, what it is that we want our parenting to look like, what it is we want our how we want our experiences to impact our children's lives. And I do believe that this is a good start. Yes, parenting much is required, but we can work together with some of the strategies that we have been given this evening to be able to improve. So we are looking forward to what is going to happen in the days to come. We have been speaking today about strategies for change, much is required. And tomorrow, we're going to be looking at parenting, much is required, parenting generation alpha. And we'll be having panelists, and that's where we have a host of panelists. We have psychiatrists, pediatricians, psychologists. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow again at 6 o'clock. We want to thank you for being here. Thanks to the technical team. We do apologize for some of the absences that we should have had this evening. Our Director of Mental Health Services, and also our Dr. Kevin Goldburn, and Dr. Judith Leiber is the Director of Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, who are unavoidably absent, and Major Dr. Susan Wright, our Acting Regional Technical Director for Southeast Regional Health Authority, who was on but had to leave suddenly because of a family emergency. And we do apologize also for Professor Donovan Campbell, Director, University of the West Indies, Mona Western Jamaica campus. But we look forward. I know that they'll be in for the days to come, and we look forward to seeing you all back online. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for your questions. And we ask that you invite your friends, your family, your neighbors, whoever it is, to be a part of the discussions as we continue with our webinars for the rest of this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Lisabeth Crossman, moderator rather, for this evening, and looking forward to seeing you for the rest of the week. Bye bye, everyone. Thanks for attending.